Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of In Session Bennington to Montpelier. I am your host, Jack Rossiter-Munley, and I am coming to you from the Bennington County Multicultural Community Center here in beautiful downtown Bennington on a snowy day in April. And I am so happy to be joined by Representatives Michael Nigro, Jonathan Cooper, David Durfee, and Senator Rob Plunkett. Welcome, everyone.
Morning.
Morning, Jack.
Thank you so much for being here this morning. We are going to spend pretty much the entire show today talking about different developments in the world of education in the state of Vermont. We don't want Senator Plunkett to feel too left out, even though a lot of the news is on the House side, but it'll be coming over to the Senate soon, so we'll get your thoughts on that. But before we get into H454, which is the House proposed transformation to state education, I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of state level requests and back and forth that's going on between the requests from the federal government to certify certain compliance with executive orders, the state level discussions that are going on, and how that's progressing. So on April 3rd is when the federal directive went out, and then on Friday, April 4th, a letter was sent out to school districts in Vermont asking them to certify compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is basically certifying non-discriminatory practices. But this was done under the guise of certifying a lack of DEI work being done within the districts. By Monday, the 7th of April, there was a new directive sent out that was basically describing that the state as an entity would certify rather than asking individual districts to certify. And this is something that's being done, and there are different responses in different states. So for example, the state of New York has indicated that it will not certify compliance. And in neighboring states, the National Education Association and the ACLU have both filed lawsuits, as well as the National Education Association branches in New Hampshire and the ACLU branches in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So neighboring states are having some sort of different responses along the lines of this action. The responses were originally going to be due by Monday, but as a result of some of this back and forth, there has been a 10-day extension to April 24th for state responses. And as of now, the indication is still that the state itself would certify blanket compliance. Part of why I was interested in bringing this up is that I knew Representative Durfee would be here, and the Shaftesbury Select Board did meet and request specifically that the SVSU superintendent join with other Vermont superintendents in refusing to certify, even with the understanding that this was no longer going to necessarily be a district by district action. And so I just wanted to read the statement that came from the Shaftesbury Select Board and then start with you, Representative Durfee, for your response on some of what's going on and how it's affecting what you're hearing from your constituents and what's going on here in Bennington County. So the Shaftesbury Select Board wrote, in adherence with the Constitution of the State of Vermont and the Town of Shaftesbury's Declaration of Inclusion, we urge the SVSU superintendent to join other Vermont superintendents in refusing the Vermont Agency of Education's request to sign a certification of compliance that would make us complicit with a potentially unconstitutional directive from the executive branch, and further to call on Secretary of Education Zoe Saunders to join our neighboring states in refusing this executive branch directive.
Yeah, well, there's a lot at stake here, and a lot happened in a very short amount of time. As you described the timeline there on Friday at the end, it was past the close of business. I think it was after 5 o'clock on Friday that State Agency of Education contacted the supervisory unions around Vermont and said, you need to do this. You've got 10 days. And there's superintendents have a lot on their plates at the best of times, and in thinking that this was the right response, in the AOE thinking that this was the right thing to do was somewhat well, it was kind of astonishing. And the quick reaction of the town and of supervisory unions themselves around the state saying, we're not going to do this. And if you've had a chance to look at, and I would encourage anyone to look at the response that New York State sent to the federal government when the feds reached out and said that each state needed to do this. That New York State said, no, we're not going to do that. It's unconstitutional. You have absolutely no authority to be asking us to do this. So I think it was absolutely right for people to push back for the select board in Shaftesbury to make that statement. I will say that I've been thinking a lot recently about the separation of powers and the different branches of government, um, both at the federal level and here at the state level. And this really is an executive branch decision and activity, and legislators and the public in general can push back against that. But this is a decision made by the governor and his staff, and we it's not our role to be making that call. We can we can certainly voice our opinion, and legislators have perhaps a little more sway when they speak up. But no, I think that the reaction, the wide reaction, is a good thing. And when I say there's a lot at stake, there's a lot of funding at stake. A considerable amount of federal funding that comes into every state goes to education. It's a large part of our education budget, but there's also a lot at stake just as for our democracy, I think, and it's encouraging to see people standing up to the bullying essentially that we've been seeing from the Trump administration just across the spectrum since he was inaugurated this time, and I know that there things are still a little bit in flux. I don't think the state has officially responded, um, and with a little more time, there's time for people to continue to speak up.
And for eagle-eyed viewers of In Session, they will note that Representative Cooper has a fresh new haircut, and so I'll send it over to him next for a little bit of a read on what's going on down in Pownell and how this has been coming to you in different ways.
Well, I thank you. Yes, this is the Elm Street Chop Shop, which is relocated to Route 302 from its former location in downtown Montpelier when it was flooded out. Um, I, I think the place to start is with the presidential administration and the Secretary of Education there, Linda McMahon, and you know, it's also the case, as Representative Durfee notes, that superintendents have a lot on their plate. Our agency of education has a lot on its plate. We're working really hard with them and have been for weeks, trying to chart a course for the future of public education, the one government service that the Vermont Constitution says the state needs to provide. Um, so there is a lot of bullying going on, and the AOE has been dealing with staffing issues, and we all have a limited amount of time in the day. So what I had, my thought was that we know that this administration, presidential administration, is comfortable with punishment and retribution. We saw Governor Janet Mills of Maine stand up for what she felt would be unconstitutional in the state of Maine. And immediately there were repercussions from different areas of the federal government, which were plainly about how she responded to a challenge. So I want to be a little understanding of the state of Vermont's response, which I believe in its directive, its letter out, it said nothing has changed in Title VI. And then, as often happens, a dialogue takes place. And when we're given a limited amount of time, when we're deliberately tried to be caught off guard or, off balance, this is what happens. And the good news is that people responded and it was the Agency of Education in consultation with the Attorney General. So there was a lot of coordination, and that still is unfolding. I think that, as Linda McMahon had said, the Secretary of Education at the federal level had said that, has been clear about wanting to dismantle the Department of Education. This is not so this is par for the course, and I'm glad that there has continued to be a coordinated response from states and within our state to put some lines in the sand and to hold on to the choices that are our choices to make. But it comes sadly at a risk, and we don't really know what may unfold from this. And as Representative Durfee mentioned, I think it's 12% of our education spending comes from the federal government. There are supervisory unions that have summer camps that they were using federal funding that had been promised to them for, and now they're told they don't have it anymore, and they're looking at six-figured holes they got to fill by themselves. And that's not the way a federal government should treat its some of its smallest constituent elements. So I'm disappointed in that. And I understand that this approach leads to a lot of confusion. And I'm glad that people in our state are engaged in dialogue and sort of holding the line where they can.
And as you noted, they're, separate from any potential retribution for however a state may take a stand on something like this, the pullback of federal dollars and what that will mean on the ground is already becoming clearer and clearer. And as we've heard more details about what the slightly over $16 million that districts across the state were expecting is not going to come through, the real impact of that through summer camps, after school programs, capital improvements to schools is being felt acutely. I'll pass it over to you, Representative Nigro, and for sort of the Bennington perspective, but also acknowledging that some of the response to this has been, the state in its response possibly saying, well, nothing's changed. We've always been in compliance with this part of civil rights law. But the concern that, certifying that in this context certifies a potentially dangerous misreading of civil rights law that lumps diversity, equity, and inclusion work into the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act from 1964.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with a lot of what Representative Durfee and Rick Cooper just shared. And, I guess the state's Agency of Education's letter that went out caused a lot of anxiety throughout the state, caused a lot of kind of a chaotic response across the state. And I guess what I would just say is, personally, I am willing to give like a little bit of leeway, perhaps. I'm not saying I'm happy with how that all went, but I also recognize some of the challenges we're up against. Our Education Secretary, Zoe Saunders, is new in her role. Doesn't mean we don't have expectations for her, but she is new in the role. She's come into a very challenging time, brand new in the role, and we're in the middle of this educational reform overhaul of our system. So she's been working a lot in that. And as a state, we're responding to very chaotic directives and changes coming at us from the federal level. And so, I look at some of this chaotic response that happened in Vermont, and for the folks that are upset at it, I really say, yes, we have to keep our heads and have a cool, measured response in Vermont to what's going on at the federal level. But let's remember that that's where the chaos is at the federal level, and we are responding to it. And it's hitting us as a state at all of these different levels, not just, obviously there's this education component we're talking about, but we're trying to respond to all of these tariff changes going up and down and the policies changing in light of the fact that we have a Canadian border, that we have an enormous amount of business crossing that border every single day. As you said, we have the specter of the loss of federal funds in all sorts of our budget. Now, some of those we've already lost. There's grants and impact that's already hit us. There's also just fear and concern about even larger impacts that potentially could come. So it's a very difficult situation we're in right now, where we are trying to go about the business of the state and do very important work that is going to take a lot of time and energy and utilizing all of Vermont's resources. And at the same time, it's like we're dodging snowballs being thrown at us from the federal level. So it's kind of trying to maintain the work we're doing while all of this chaotic change is coming out of Washington.
And for you, Senator Plunkett, how are you feeling the effects of that chaos as you try to go about your work as a legislator, trying to do the people's business here in Vermont? Obviously, this, act around education has been a specific and very energizing for a lot of people in the state, part of the chaos, but it is so generalized. How is that affecting sort of your and the Senate's and the legislature's ability to get done what you want to get done?
Sure, and I'll try to answer that, but we can start off with just kind of generally, and I'm not excluding Republicans from this, but in the legislature, I've pretty much universally heard absolute disgust at what the Trump administration is doing. And we've all been talking about education, which is probably the most emotionally charged historically issue for Vermont. So what we had regarding that specific request to certify was sort of a balance of, we've got to protect the vast amount of money from the feds for our educational system that we're now trying to reestablish versus, the very real risk of putting a target right on Vermont's chest. And frankly, I'm glad that I wasn't in that role to have to make that decision. But I think what happened is really a great example of how Vermont works, where there was quite frankly a confusing and ham-fisted letter that was sent out. But I think overall, everyone is in agreement that we're going to push back in the best way we can to that request. We're not going to be cornered. And the fact that we've seen some changes, we've not yet seen the final response, which I believe, and I have voiced my support for essentially taking the New York way of telling the Trump administration to stuff it. And these are the discussions that we've had in the Senate. That there have been conversations, not myself personally, but conversations from senators with Secretary Saunders, with Attorney General Clark, and we have, and I think with the governor's office, that there is a position that Vermont has that we've had. It's just how to voice that the best way. And there's one way of doing it where we just sort of try to do it under the radar and say, yeah, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing versus, we do not tolerate this in Vermont and we won't. I think we're going to fall for more on the latter side, given that, as everyone else has mentioned, it's all chaos from the federal government about what sort of money we'll have, so we can't really trust that anything will be there regardless of what we do. So having that voice is what's important. And from my standpoint, trying to not let it derail what we're looking at. And I don't think I wasn't on the House side, but I think that the House really took a very careful and didn't last as long last night as I thought it might, but a very careful approach to finally having the education bill passed in the House to pass it on to the Senate. And so I think the deliberate approach that Vermont has been taking, the legislature in general has been taking, is really what I've been seeing in the Senate and what we're going to keep going forward despite the chaos, to not overreact, to not immediately have, this is the be all and end all, but we take time. And we're going to take time to do all of this. I'm not sure if that actually answered your question, but that's my response to it.
I think that was an excellent answer, and it provides a perfect segue into our next topic, which is going to be H454, which is the House's proposed transformation to education in the state of Vermont. Again, the House and the Senate have both taken up the governor's call to really take this as a major priority, and this was the House's bill that went through, and it was in fact passed yesterday. We'll go on to the Senate next, so we'll definitely get your response and some of your insights into it, Senator Plunkett, but I do want to start with our representatives. So there were, the governor himself has said he is not ready to sign a bill in this form, but he's very hopeful that this is the next step in the process to getting something to him that he will be comfortable with signing. There were two readings of the bill. The first one was 60 yeas to 83 nays, and the second was 87 yeas to 55 nays. Just so we're clear on how all of the representatives in Bennington voted, the three gentlemen on this call, Representatives Durfee, Cooper, and Nigro, were all nay votes on the first reading and yay votes on the second. And Representative Corcoran was also a nay vote on the first reading and a yay vote on the second. Representative Morrissey was a yay vote to the first and a nay vote to the second, and Representative Greer voted yay to both. I wanted to start with you, Representative Nigro, to give a little bit of a characterization of the bill as it passed, some of the changes that happened between those two readings, and what the sort of overall picture looks like in terms of differences between this and the governor's vision?
Sure. I think there's actually a lot of, in terms of broad strokes, there's a lot of agreement. Some of the major changes that are contemplated both in the bill we've passed, but in the governor's recommended bill, are a change in the way we fund our schools, moving to, instead of local budgets being developed, instead a foundation formula where the state funds using a formula that ensures equal school funding, or a much fairer school funding across the state. Both bills look to consolidate the large number of districts we have, in different ways. If I had to just broadly say, probably what the biggest area of disagreement is a little bit on timing and speed. The governor has really wanted to move quickly on this. And, I think the truth is, I don't think there's a person that doesn't want to make this transition as quickly as possible. I think as the House worked on it, once you get into the nuts and bolts of such a dramatic change, we basically just found the timeline of the governor's proposal just was unrealistic, because there's all of these steps that have to fall into place. We need to determine what those districts will be. The governor had a first draft of that, but I think truthfully, the administration, it wasn't even committed to their first draft of the map. We have to really give some thought about the map and make sure we come up with the best districts possible. We would have to come up with new voting wards to vote for new school boards for these new districts. And all of these steps have to fall into place before the transformation, really, this finished product of our educational transformation occurs. So I think that's the biggest thing, is I think speed and timing is probably the biggest area of dispute. The one other comment I'll make, though, that is a little more maybe political, but I think it's something of interest because it's a question I get a lot, is a lot of constituents have asked me, how are the parties working together? How are people getting along in the state House? And I think there's two reasons we get that question. First of all, is on a national level, things are obviously about as divisive as they've ever been. But then also in Vermont, the governor, very popular Republican governor, has been has butted heads for many years with a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. And what I'd say is there's plenty of disagreement. And if you read the responses from maybe the House or from the governor, you might say, boy, there's a lot of distance between them, and they're not working together that great. But I would give a different perspective. I just want to point out that working together, collaboration is complicated, and it doesn't always look like it's going perfectly. But I actually do see more collaboration in this term than in the last term that I had been part of. And, I read the governor's statement after we passed the bill, and he certainly pointed out the problems he has with it and the things he wants to change. But he also noted that he appreciated the productive conversations we're having at this point. So there's a lot of work to do to make sure all parties can agree to this bill. But I think what we're seeing is a collaborative process of compromise. So I definitely think that there's a long way to go right now, but we are in a situation where we're going to have to compromise to come to agreement on this.
And on that subject of compromise, I'll go to Representative Cooper next. Can you talk about what turned your nay vote into a yay vote? What was that process that changed along the way?
Sure. I think, one of that nay was about an adjustment an amendment that would adjust the timetable, that would accelerate things to move a little faster, which I wasn't particularly comfortable with, because, as Representative Nigro has pointed out, and as we heard throughout the conversation around the future of public education and its governance and its funding and its assessments of qualities, we'd be creating some of the largest voting areas by size in the state that we've ever seen, bigger than counties in some instances. So this is going to be, we can't really rush that because our governance structure, like a lot of governance structures, doesn't do great when it's rushed. And so that I thought was, really important to ensure that we had adequate time to give the people that we're going to be asking to consider these changes an opportunity to run through run through those ramifications. I'll note that the supervisory unions and the superintendents as a block really felt like this was the right thing to do and the right time to do it, but that to give them that runway, and for many of them to perhaps become someone who no longer has a supervisory union role to play, that's asking a lot of people. That's asking people to say that the right thing might not be the best thing for me. And I admire the many superintendents who backed this, who have backed this House Bill 454, knowing what the implications are for their own job security. So I was really pleased to see, and then some of the conversation I want to just add in here among the Democrats, the Republicans, the progressives, which is a not small or not insignificant portion of the House representation, and the independents. We all have our constituencies at home. We all have our districts, and that's who we're thinking about. But we're also being asked to think about the state as a whole, the realities of having 112,000 students 40 years ago and having like 80,000 now, 84,000 now. That's a big drop, and that has implications for the system and how it delivers, who it's delivering to, who it uses to deliver education. With that generational, in the course of a generation, with that adjustment, I think it's really imperative that we keep our eye on the ball, that we're not just doing something because the taxes are too dang high. We're doing something because the schools are too dang empty and the resources are too dang scarce. This is an important time, and like a lot of things, the change can be imperceptible, day to day. But when we zoom out, we see something that's very different at this point than it was in the past. And so we're working with the system that we have and towards a system that we feel best meets the needs of Vermont's children today and in the future. And that conversation isn't always captured in the voice votes, in the roll call votes, and the vote explanations, and the press releases. A lot of that is conversations that we're having over lunch, in the hallways, and I feel good about that.
And to pick up on that a little bit, not only the conversations amongst legislators, but also the feedback that's coming in from constituents. A lot of the anxiety around some of these changes has been from the more rural districts, where those losses of population then can lead to more acute changes, just because if you already have a very small school population and it drops by a percentage, that can look like an empty school and an inefficient education system. So I'm sort of curious from you, Representative Durfee, how some of those anxieties are being expressed, how they're being incorporated into this legislation, and what that'll look like going forward.
Yeah, I think you've captured it very well. I do just want to say before speaking to that question that as Representative Cooper, I think, just mentioned, the two votes that you referred to were actually not the second and third reading. The second reading was a voice vote, and I voted yes. I don't know whether my colleagues on the call all voted yes all the way through, but the other vote was a roll call vote on an amendment, which was not a friendly amendment. So I think our positions have all been consistent throughout the process. I have, in my legislative district, I'm the only person representing it's a one-person district. I have 3 different school districts that are part of my legislative district, and each one of them has a different model. So Shaftesbury is part of the Mount Anthony and the Southwest Elementary School District, so public districts, and then Sunderland to the north is part of the Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union, and it's a rural community. It doesn't operate a high school, and it's historically been served by Burn Burton, the academy there, and then the part of Shaftesbury that's located in the North Bennington Independent School District doesn't operate an elementary school, and many of its students attend the village school, and some don't, and that's actually an important part of the conversation. I feel that the legislation that we've passed, which is, I'll be the first to say, not perfect, and there are plenty of more steps along the way before anything gets enacted. But I feel that it actually is beneficial to all 3 of the school districts that I represent. As far as the timing goes, those of us who I think are on the call, and then other members of the delegation, have had a couple of conversations with the supervisory unions, and I will say that they expressed relief when they heard that our House bill was planning to slow things down in comparison to the timing, anyway, that the governor's bill had introduced. That they were deeply concerned about rushing forward with something that wasn't fully baked, and I think that that's really the biggest difference between the 2 different approaches, and the comments that we heard on the floor yesterday were largely about people wanting to move as quickly as possible, and then others saying, no, this is the right timing. As you mentioned, though, there's also some opposition, notable opposition from communities, more rural communities that have small buildings, small class sizes in those small buildings, that are less likely to 10 years from now, under the existing language anyway that we have in the bill that we passed yesterday, would be less likely, I should say, to still be going. Now, that things can certainly change, both demographically, and things can change with the legislation right now. But stepping back a little bit, I think the impetus for this conversation really was the cost of education, and we have broadened that, and as we should have, to be looking at the quality of the education that we're delivering. But it was the cost that raised taxes so high over the past few years that it turned into such a political issue that finally, this has been a problem that's been bubbling away for a while, but it finally led the governor and the legislature then to say, yeah, we do need to do something, and it will be, for some people, politically unpalatable, uncomfortable at least, but it's getting a handle ultimately on those costs through the foundation formula that will be saying, this is really what it should cost to educate students, and we're going to ask school districts to work within those boundaries, those guardrails.
And I believe one of the biggest divergences in terms of timeline is the speed of implementation of the new foundation formula. And so I'm curious to hear from you, Senator Plunkett, how the Senate is going to take this piece of legislation that's passed the House and look at things like that element of the timeline, looking at the concerns that rural areas are expressing, and how you on the Senate side plan to take this legislation and move forward with it.
And yeah, I haven't been directly part of the conversations either in our finance or in the education committees. I know they've been looking at this, especially the education committee, in fair detail, and coming up with their own sort of plan. So a lot of it is, I don't know how it's really going to unfold in the Senate. But what I guess I'll step back and I'll start with sort of my cynical side, where I saw the governor's proposal, which pretty much universally people thought that it was almost a dead letter as soon as it came in. And then the House Education Committee did a lot of work and put some aspects into it that made it considerably better and more palatable for most folks. And the reaction to that was, well, the governor now doesn't like it, so it's going to be put on the Democrats for whatever the next election is, and we're going to take the heat for it. But what I was heartened with afterwards were the words of the governor, and I think the general discussion that I had been hearing around the state house is that this is something that, as Representative Durfee said, it is not perfect, but we want to keep working on it, and we have avenues where we're going to come to agreement. And so having something that's truly bipartisan in the end, I think is really, it sounds like that is the goal of everybody. So my political cynicism is happily squashed again with my since my time is in in the Senate. But the what we heard through the campaign and what we had before was, we don't want to pay as much for education. We want to deal with the financing. And we didn't hear a lot about, we want the governance to completely change. And there's different beliefs on whether or not the governance needs to change in order to reduce the cost or to make it more efficient. And I think that's going to be a lot of the discussion. I'm sort of jumping all over the place because I haven't been knee deep into this. But I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Representative Cooper or Nigro said, who doesn't want to do this quickly? I certainly don't. I don't. I'm a product of our education system. I'm a product of the Bennington public school system. And I represent this mishmash of different ways that we teach our kids throughout the county. And it's almost incomprehensible, but I think I've got a handle on it over the past few months. And I think that's the Vermont way. I think our small schools, our different ideas, our different approaches, all is something that really represents Vermont, where we're truly unique. And I might be different in all of this than a lot of folks. And I'm surprised at how traditional I am regarding this, because considering I'm not in a lot of ways. But I like how our system is. And unfortunately, part of that is that it's very expensive. And finding ways to make it fit better makes sense. But every time we talk about governance, we have all of these different aspects of education that causes great concern and lots of chaos, where everyone thinks that their school is going to close and everyone wants someone else's school to close. And I think that gets in the way of what we really should be talking about all of the time, is what is the best way to teach our children to go into the world as adults. And that's essentially in two different ways, whether it's going into the workforce and being productive immediately. And a lot of the focus on there might be on our tech centers. And then also just simply having our children be something that can go into the world as citizens of Vermont and take, I don't want to say values, but take the Vermont culture into Vermont and also have them stay here. So that's my sort of broad overview on this. I think that the Senate is probably going to be looking at the House bill and making some significant changes, and that hopefully that work will be done quickly, so that the conference committee can get into the nitty-gritty of it. And we don't have much time left with that in the session. So we'll see if it's the shorter session that we were being told about a couple of weeks ago, or if it's going to be the much longer session. But there's still a lot of work to do. and taking our time on it, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, is the best way to go about it. So that's my prediction for the Senate. Big changes, but also taking much time.
That makes a lot of sense. And however long the session lasts, we will be here every Saturday with a different rotating cast of legislators ready to talk through everything that's going on. We have a little bit of a shorter show today because of everybody's busy schedules on this snowy April day in Vermont. So I want to thank all 4 of you for joining today, and I look forward to continuing this conversation on another episode of In Session.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack.
You, Jack. Bye, everybody.